Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Verdant Revolution. This will be Part 20, Chapter 19, entitled Silent Judgment. Izuku stepped into the lobby of Moonlit Industries to find a very tired-looking Mei resting her head against the reception desk. He didn't even have to ask the question on both his and Dabi's minds before she was looking at the two of them and speaking. Kiyoka was pretty messed up. I cleaned her up, stitched up her laceration, set her nose, and sedated her. She's asleep right now in the 104 since it's spare. Himiko moved over to the 105 for the night to keep an eye on her. Has the bastard been dealt with? Mei didn't need the confirmation. She could see clear as day, the blood drenching Izuku. Blood that hadn't come from the undercover officer. She could smell the soot and ash on the two as well, so that answered where the body went. But she still wanted to hear it. Wanted to hear that the bastard had been dealt with the way he should be dealt with. It had taken a while for Mei to get used to having Kiyoka around, as she wasn't an engineer like them. But even she had to admit that she had grown to be family. Dabi nodded his head slowly, wary that Izuku's bloodlust seemed to be rubbing off onto his partner. Yeah, gearhead. Nothing left of him now, but Midoriya didn't let him get away with it. She stared for a long moment into his eyes before letting out a breath that she hadn't been aware she'd been holding. She tossed Izuku his phone before stepping towards the doors that led deeper into the facility. You made the call to put him at contain instead of eliminate when you found him to be lurking around. Don't fret. You get to make the call to her parents. Izuku sighed and nodded. Yeah, he would make the call, even if it was going to be an unpleasant one. What does she mean, put him at contain, boss? You said it before as well. He moved from contain to eliminate. Izuku glanced over to Dabi before peering back at his phone, looking for the Jiros' contact information. I run on a DCE protocol in both combat zones and in information I gather. De-escalate, contain, eliminate. I gave Tajima a warning to stay away from mine about a year and some change back, after he'd followed Kiyoka and myself to her home. Since then, he hasn't done anything other than occasionally follow her around. As such, I deemed the situation contained. I was evidently wrong. I don't know as of yet what triggered the escalation in his behavior, and frankly, I don't care. Once the situation has moved past containment, I'll eliminate it without hesitation. I won't be making that mistake again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make a phone call. You go ahead and clock out for the day, Dabi. I won't be sleeping tonight. Dabi nodded his head and was more than happy to get some sleep. His boss may have fixed up his body and given him some upgrades, but that didn't mean that he had the unending well of energy that Midoriya seemed to have. As he walked deeper into the facility, he contemplated Midoriya's DCE system and wondered just how many people sat on the knife's edge of elimination and would never even know it. It was just past midnight when both of the Jiros came barging through the front doors of Moonlit Industries, wearing panic on their faces. Izuku wasn't surprised when Kyotoku was the first to speak, nor was he surprised with the sheer amount of alarm and downright fear the man was acting with. Where is she? Where's my baby girl? Izuku wanted to sigh right then, because he knew this was going to be painful for them to hear. But he knew if he did, he would only set them more on edge than they already were. As I said on the phone, there's been a bit of an incident. You didn't say anything on the phone. You just told us that something had happened, that we need to get down here quickly. What happened? Where's our daughter? Where... Luckily for Izuku, before he could be overwhelmed by the frantic father figure, Kiyoka's mother stepped up. It was fairly evident that Mika Jiro was the more sensible of the two at this moment. She was clearly panicked, but was, thankfully, retaining her senses and not giving in to the fear like her husband was. Let Izuku explain. I'm sure that if he's called us down here at midnight, then it isn't something we would want to be explained on the phone. Izuku gave a rueful smile to Mika before thanking her, and continuing with his explanation. Thank you, Miss Jiro. You're quite right, this isn't something you should hear over the phone. Around 11:30, my head of security and I were alerted by our security system that there was a man following Kiyoka with what seemed to be the intent to attack her. As such, we both took off running to intercept. Unfortunately, we didn't make it in time to stop the attack. Izuku wasn't going to tell them that the shattered concrete outside had been from them taking off at full speed, but all the same, both parents sucked in a breath as he continued. We did, however, get there in time to stop your employee, Tajima Toru, from doing anything more than just hitting her. Izuku let the implications of that sink in for the parents. It was a lot to process in one go. He could tell when it had sunk in, as both parents went deathly white as the blood leached out of them. Before they could start asking questions, Izuku continued with the information dump, knowing it was better to get it all out in one go. Before I say anything else, let me say that she is all right physically. She has a concussion, several stitches, and a broken nose. Besides that, though, she has no physical injuries. I stress the word physical because this is going to be hard on her mentally. She is trying to be a hero, and yet she was placed in such a situation where she had to be rescued a second time. Kiyoka's going to need you two when she wakes up. Kyotaku took a step forward and was going to take another towards Izuku when Mika placed a hand on his arm to hold him back. You call that all right physically? What the fuck is wrong with you? Izuku frowned now because clearly it hadn't sunk in as deeply as he'd hoped. Yes, I do. Compared to what could have happened to her, yes. She is all right physically. What happened to Tajima? Izuku looked now to Mika as she spoke to him. Her eyes were hard, her fear having morphed into fury. We terminated his employment last week because he was violating several rules. Do we need to worry about him again? Ah, there's the catalyst. She doesn't need to know that, though. Izuku's smile went from rueful to cold and sharp. Oh no, Mr. and Mrs. Jiro. You won't need to worry about him ever again. I've made sure of that. The smile and tone sent chills up their spine. They had thought Kiyoka had been joking when she had told them Izuku could be scary occasionally. Now they understood wholeheartedly what she had meant. You'll find Kiyoka asleep in the apartment 104 on the top floor. You're all welcome to stay as long as she needs. It had taken a week for Kiyoka to heal and go home, and though she bore no physical signs from the attack besides the new scar gracing her lips, she clearly wasn't all right mentally. She had tried to tell him she was fine, but he knew better than anyone the signs of trauma. He leaned back in his desk chair as he thought about it. He spent most of his nights here in his office parsing through paperwork and other administrative tasks that needed to be handled. But tonight it seemed he had other issues pressing on his mind. They had 11 months until the entry exams for UA University, and May had only just gotten through the worst of the attack on their headquarters. If Kiyoka was going to be a hero, then he'd have to take a more active role in her recovery. Not that he minded, of course, but he'd have to be careful. These things tended to heal the best with time and support. Rushing it could cause the opposite of what they wanted. May had been right when it came to the wall thickness. It was an oversight. He should have had them soundproofed. Kiyoka had insisted a couple days into her stay that they get back to their training regime, but Izuku had known that it would have been disastrous. She was still jerking when people made unexpected movements around her, and though Izuku doubted she noticed it, her focus wasn't all there. He had told her to rest for the rest of the month before they got back to it, and Izuku could only hope that she would be ready to get back to training when it was time for it. Izuku stood up with a snap out of his desk chair, wringing his weapon out of its holster in one swift movement to point out across his office. It took only a few moments for Phoenix to speak to him. Izuku, what's wrong? There's nothing there, and I'm not picking up anything on the sensors. He grimaced because that meant the sensors weren't picking up what he was sensing, and that meant only one thing he could think of. Enough toying around. If you want to have a conversation, then come on out. Otherwise, get the fuck out of this facility. Izuku was beginning to get annoyed now. It was one thing to barge into their headquarters. It was another entirely to both barge in and be impolite when you did it. Seconds stretched into tens of seconds before finally, a purple swirl appeared in the middle of the room, and all hell broke loose with their alarm system. An ear-splitting klaxon ripped through the facility, and the defense systems engaged. Izuku wasn't worried about May and Himiko as Phoenix reported to them that they had reached the panic room on the residential floor, and she had full control of the 30mm turrets around the facility. He did decide he would have to bump the automation project up priority, though, if they were going to keep having these kinds of incidents. Dobby slammed the door open, blue flames already creeping up his arms as one large man stepped out of the purple swirl, the mist coalescing into a person. The purple mist of a man was standing behind the bigger man, so Izuku made the assessment of which was in charge. The moment he focused his attention fully on the boss, there were several details he took in. He was large, even to Izuku, who had now reached 6'2". If he had to guess, the man was about 7'6", and while he wasn't huge, he gave the impression of power, both with his demeanor and his presence. Both men wore well-tailored suits that, had the circumstances been different, Izuku might have complimented them on. It was when Izuku took in the man's face, or lack thereof, that he hissed with his tongue, cursing in his head. He recognized the man from the whispers of the underground. He put his sidearm back into its holster and sat down with a glare on his face. "Phoenix, Dabi, stand down. There isn't anything you can do about this one, and you would just get in my way. Dabi, go get Mei and Himiko out of here just in case." Dabi jerked. It was the first time Izuku had chosen to speak to him through his implants, but he quickly realized the gravity of the situation. As he moved away from the door and quickly towards the stairs, Izuku spoke. "And to whom do I credit the displeasure of a visit from the boogeyman of the underground? All for one." "I see that you know who I am, young man. I must say that I'm surprised you would be so blunt with me." The large man had taken one of the seats across from Izuku and crossed his hands on his left leg, after laying it across his right. "But we can still have some decorum, no?" Izuku narrowed his eyes, wanting to curse. This was going to be a massive pain in his ass. "If you wanted decorum, then you should have made an appointment like a normal person rather than use—" Izuku gestured to the well-dressed purple mist. "A Church of Clarity teleporter. Though now that I see you together, I suspect he's been more of a go-between." Though he couldn't see All for One's eyes, he could certainly read his body language, and he was displeased when he spoke of the COC. "Yes, a failed experiment that has gotten very out of hand. I would prefer it if you didn't associate Kurogiri and me with them. I suppose you are correct, though, so I'll get to the point. You have something that is of interest to me, or should I say, several pieces of technology that you and your partner are working on." "Please, go on, because if you're simply requesting them, then you can leave." Izuku hadn't stopped glaring at the two men, and the tension in the room was rising. The atmosphere was suffocating with pressure, and if it had been physical, then sparks would have rained down around the room. All for One chuckled. He had to admit that he liked the spirit of this one, even if he wasn't crazy about someone not knowing their place. "Of course I'm not asking for something without compensation. You are quirkless, are you not? How would you like a quirk of your very own? Or you could even join us. The League of Villains would always welcome someone as brilliant as yourself." Izuku sighed, closing his eyes and leaning back, as if giving it a moment's thought before smiling. While All for One had seen the sheer animosity before and was able to keep from flinching, Kurogiri was not, and he involuntarily took a step back. "I must say, had you come to me only a couple of years ago with that offer, I may have just taken you up on it. But I have to say I have no interest whatsoever in having a quirk now. I've made peace with my quirklessness. I found a better solution after all. As for your offer to join you, well, I'm going to have to decline. While I may not have any love for most heroes, I have absolutely no love for men like yourself who would inflict suffering on the innocent just for your own gain. I'm sorry, but I'm very busy, and if that was your proposal, then the both of you can show yourselves out, the way you came in." All for One glared now at Izuku, and if looks could kill, then they both would have been dead by this point. "You misunderstand. That is the easy, friendly way of doing things. If it comes to it, I could kill you and your partner right now and take what I want." All for One may have been okay with the slightly crazy energy before, but even he could feel the pressure that was emanating from the boy now. The sheer bloodlust and fury on their own would have been enough to startle him in their amounts, but the presence he felt from the child now was on par with All Might, in his prime. Izuku's eyes were glowing again as he growled his words at All for One. "Lupus non temet canem latrenum. You're right, this is the easy way of doing things. You may be able to harm me, as I don't have my equipment, but do you really think that you'll get out of it unscathed, mooning Shigaraki?" It was All for One's turn to jerk now. The boy, no, the beast, that sat in front of him, spoke his real name that should have been lost with time with such ease that it was no guess. A name he had believed removed from all sources. The shadows in the room seemed to darken as All for One was locked into those pits of viridian fire, and he could feel the eyes of a predator on him like he hadn't felt for a very long time. "Or do you think that I don't recognize a respirator when I see one? Even if it is a fancy one made to look like a creepy-ass skull mask. Even if you could kill me and get away, do you really think the heroes wouldn't come in time? Wouldn't figure it out? that the government watching this facility wouldn't have something to say. You would so easily violate the treaties by attacking a Japanese asset. No, you are a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them, Shigaraki. You can't afford that. Let me make something clear for you right now, though. I have no interest in the feud you have going on with the number one for some reason. I don't even particularly care why. But if you come after one of my own, I'll make your life a living hell. I don't have the qualms that normal heroes have. I will hunt and kill anyone and everyone that chooses to associate with you. I wonder, how will you explain to Tomura in hell why his last moments were him choking on his own blood? Make an appointment like a normal person and come with a proper business deal. For now, however, last warning before I get impolite. Get out of my office. All for One could see now the danger that was in front of him. This was no mere boy, and he would be damned if he was quirkless. His eyes glowed like jade fire, while his snarling sounded like the growl of a panther. His incisors had grown in his mouth as he got angrier, and the wood on the desk was cracking with the pressure Midoriya was placing on it with his hands. The Grim Reaper's blade was wrapping around everyone's throats, and it would seem he'd need to leave before this thing decided to take his head off. How disappointing. I suppose we'll have to see again in the future. Which of us will get what they want, won't we? Kurogiri, we're leaving. It took Izuku far longer to calm himself than he would have liked. This was the second time this month someone had dared to threaten those around him. He hadn't had problems like this controlling his anger since he first got spliced. His clan had been able to take care of themselves, had been able to defend one another. Now someone dared to threaten the members that couldn't. It would appear that even he had some self-control training to do. He couldn't afford to go off on every villain that took a swing at Kiyoka in the future. Izuku reached up to his ear, tapping the communicator under it and connecting to Mei and Dabi. We're clear, but we need to talk. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 19. The second half of this chapter will be up next. This is a lengthier chapter. The author had written this one out at about 7.6 thousand words, so I thought this was a good breaking point for this one, especially since the inclusion of All for One, right, and him getting kicked out of Izuku's office. I just thought the interaction between the two of them was really well written out, and I also like the fact that, we're getting some more development with Kiyoka, we're getting some more understanding of the after effects of the assault that she had gone through, so I really like how this is being developed, and the lead up is building up to them entering into UA University. So let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.